So that answers the riddle of Peter's denials. There's another issue, totally separate from that. When should they be in order of the events that Jesus is involved in? Because Matthew and Mark have all of the events that Jesus goes through. Then all three of Peter's denials combined. And immediately after that, they take Jesus to Pilate at the beginning of chapter 27 in Matthew. Mark has the same. All of what Jesus went through, then Peter's 3 denials, then they take Jesus to Pilate. Luke, however, is totally opposite. They have Peter's 3 denials, then all that Jesus went through. Then they take Jesus to Pilate in chapter 23. John is the only one that totally breaks all this and separates Peter's denials. The very first event is Peter's first denial. He comes in, and the doorkeeper is the one woman. That's how I'm going to have this explained. The doorkeeper is the maid who first questions him. That's his first denial. Then it goes right after that to verse 18. They made a fire. Peter stood there and warmed himself. Then verse 19, it goes into Jesus being questioned. I spoke openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple where the Jews always resort, and in secret have I said nothing. He gets smacked in the face and mentions in verse 24 that he's bound, but he's still already at the high priest's house. The point is that he's bound. That's why this verse is here. He was smacked while bound, not that he was moved anywhere. So I'm actually going to move 24 to earlier because he goes through this entire questioning while bound. But then it goes back to Peter. His second and third denial are mentioned here. Simon Peter stood and warmed himself, and they said therefore to him, are you not also one of his disciples? This is the group. The second denial is to a group. And then the third is when the kinsman of whose ear Peter cut off, questioned him, Peter's third denial. Except in Luke, it clearly says that between that second and third denial, there's about an hour's separation between them. Luke 22:58. After a little while, another saw him and said, you are also one of them. Peter said, man, I am not. Now 59. And about the space of an hour, after another confidently affirmed, saying, of a truth, this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean. So that's the third denial. The second and third are separated by an hour. I could have it the way John has. Peter's first denial, then a section of Jesus' interrogation, then Peter's second denial, the gap of an hour as explained in Luke, and during that gap, the rest of what Jesus goes through, his interrogation, his questioning, beatings, and being smacked and blindfolded. Then Peter's third denial, just before Jesus is brought to Pilate. And I think that sort of makes sense because in Luke it says, after Peter's third denial, the Lord turned and looked upon Peter, and Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crow, you shall deny me thrice. And Peter went down and wept. And this is where it mentions that Jesus was beaten, but I'm not sure if that's the right order. And it goes into his interrogation. But again, Matthew, Mark had all this before, so I don't know if this should go here. Perhaps on the way he's brought to Pilate is when he looks at Peter, and Peter remembers what Jesus said, and that's when he leaves and weeps bitterly. John, after the third denial, they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the hall of judgment. Yeah, okay, so he's also going to Pilate. The hall of judgment, it was early. They themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover, because the Passover hasn't happened yet. It was not the Last Supper. It's still coming. Then, verse 29, Pilate then went out to them. So, yeah. All four of them have, after Peter's denial, Jesus is brought to Pilate. So that's how I'm going to do it. I will go along with John that there's a denial, events from Jesus, second denial, then back to Jesus, then third denial, and then brought to Peter. So I wasn't sure if I should continue on with the next of Peter's denial or put in here what happens to Jesus, because the very next words in Matthew are, and after a while came to him they that stood by, and the third accusation to Peter. After a while, right? Mark has something very similar. And a little after, they that stood by said, accused Peter the third time. Luke is the most clear, and about the space of 1 hour after. Another confidently affirmed, saying, and this is the third accusation. So, some space and time, Matthew and Mark. Luke is the most clear, about an hour. A lot can happen in an hour, especially if Jesus has just been arrested and they've been trying to kill him for months. They're not just going to let him sit there. They're going to go through with their attempts to get him killed. So I thought perhaps I should go right into what it says in Matthew and Mark at the beginning. Now the chief priests and the elders and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death. This is probably happening while the accusations and the questions are being put to Peter. Mark also has the same thing. Just after Jesus is arrested and after Peter sits down. The chief priests and all the council sought for witness against Jesus to put him to death and found none. Luke waits until after Peter's third denial, then says, and the men that held Jesus mocked him and smote him. When they had blindfolded him, they struck him. No question of false witnesses in Luke. John has the earlier portion of the questioning of Jesus, not the later part where they say, what do you say about yourself? Because this story of what Jesus is going through is probably all in line. But there's another storyline going by next door with Peter. I felt it might make sense to jump back and forth. A little bit from Peter, a little bit from Jesus. A little bit from Peter, a little bit more from Jesus, which is what I was about to do, of the false witnesses being sought. Then go back to the third denial from Peter. Then Jesus is brought to Pilate. So it'd be like a movie going back and forth. However, Matthew and Mark and Luke all have all of Jesus' trial, or at least this first part of his trial. Then at once, Peter's denial. Same in Mark. First part of Jesus' trial. Peter's denials. Luke has it Peter's denials first, then Jesus' first part of his trial. Only John has what I did, which is Peter's first denial, go back to Jesus, then Peter's second denial. But then it has the third denial connected with the second. Which means that all four of the Gospels have Peter's second and third denials right next to each other. So even though I think it's a good idea to have like a movie switching back and forth between Jesus and Peter, none of the Gospels have that gap between Peter's second and third denial with Jesus' actions in the middle. So I'm just going to go with what all four of them have. Peter's second denial already happened. I'm going to go right into his third denial. Then what happens with Jesus?